Hello guys, good morning and welcome back. So in this video I want to take us through the process of how to stitch our male English trouser. So I will take them one step at a time. So after you must have finished watching the cutting procedures, the gumming, now the stitching is what you're about to watch. Now the first thing you will do is to fix your pocket facing in your pocketing or lining. Bear in mind that this was starting by 13 when edge was slashed. I made a video on how to drop this and everything, so do well to check it out. So the pocket facing has front and back as well. So the part that you mark chalk is your back. Then pick the lining or the pocketing. The straight part will be lapped on the straight edge of the pocketing. So here you make sure you gently stitch all through. You sew in this whole shape, right? You sew all this whole shape. It's advisable that you sew on the lining on the weave tip. Now I make sure I weave my pocketing. You can still fold if you want to fold. Well, weaving makes the work a whole lot easier. So stitch on the lining. So this is the first stage or first thing you need to do. Stitch all through this way on the weaved edge, making sure as well that the lining is relaxed or balanced. Then you stitch all out. You stitch all out. You stitch all out. You stitch all through to this point. So now you have sewn this. So you would also do the same thing on the other pocketing. But in doing that, you must make sure you don't do it on the wrong side. How do I mean? Don't repeat this same pocketing, having this slash like a replica of this. The other one will be the other way around. The slash that was here will not come here. This pocket facing will not come the other way around. That's the simplest explanation I'm giving. So as you can see, the slash area is now this area. So I will now fix my pocket facing on the other side. So automatically, this has become the right pocketing and the other one has become the left pocketing. So I will sew stitch here as well. I will show you the next thing to do as well. So here we have fixed the pocketing on the facing on the pocketing. Look at it. One will be on the left, one will be on the right. The slashes will be facing each other this way. So this is the first step you need to do or take. Now the next you will do now is to pick one part of the trouser. Now when you pick a part of the trouser, the gummed edge already you know how this is gummed. So the gummed edge will be placed at this slash point, and it will be placed half-inch across. Please, half-inch across. It can be 1 inch, half-inch. This gum folded edge must be lapping half-inch across the lining this way. So you carefully hold it down, then still place it in a slashed form. Don't put it straight this way. It will still be in a slashed form or in a bent form this way, making sure that every line, every part is perfectly connected, right? Cut it out in this form, and then you go all the way to this very point. So it goes all the way to this very point, all the way. So at this edge, you can now fold this pocket tip, right? You can fold, or you can still weave if you want to weave. There's no problem. Anyone you want to do. So, but folding this one is better off. It gives you a neater finishing. So carefully stitch and make sure that your stitching is across the folded line. Then make sure you fold all the way to this point. So once you have folded all the way to this point, then the next thing you will do is to stitch on top, then stitching at the tip. Now, please note importantly that how you stitch your threading is very important. It helps to contribute to your neat finishing. So in some of those final stitches you will make, it is recommended that you stitch at the tip. The tip stitching helps you to give you a neater look than stitching a 1/4 inch apart. So you make sure you take note of all of these details I am giving you, and make sure you cut your threads. Don't say later. So look at the stitching we have made. Look at how it is. Then look at the back. You see the half-inch placement must be this way. This was the first one we made before the V. So this half-inch is very, very important. After which, then you're going to free fold the pocket point to this very point. You fold it backwards this way, right? And then after you have done that folding, you are going to start from that place you notched and come up, come like half inch or 1/4 inch in, 1/4 inch in this way. Then you make sure that what you are stitching here, this distance from the pocket edge here to the machine needle must be 1/4. That's 0.25. Please don't sew at the tip. For English trousers, don't sew at the tip or it's very close to the tip. So I use the machine footer to gauge or to measure the distance, the width I sew here. This is called decorative stitch, and it must be as straight as possible and as perfect as possible as well. So gently stitch all the way down this way. Your hands must be as straight as possible. So this is how it must look like. If you want to work with my pattern, please follow my instructions, right? So this is how it must look like. You see how straight and neat it is, right? So one line is enough. Don't sew two or three. One is enough. It must be straight. After which, then you are going to now place this loop this way. This pocketing this way, and place the trouser panel to lap 2.5 away from the edge of this point. Now, this 2.5 here must be 2.5. It helps us to replace that notching we made on the pocket edge on the waist of the trouser when we were cutting, right? You know, we used to notch 2.5 for the pocket, so you must bring it back again so that the waist will come back to the original waist by 4, which you made plus extra 1. If here goes less than 2.5, your waist has reduced. If here goes more than 2.5, your waist has increased. So here must be 2.5 at every circumstance, except when you do not notch here 2.5. Maybe for children, if you notch 1.5 or 2, you do the same measurement 1.5 or 2 inches this way. So you must make sure you follow my instructions. So after you have done this, then you make sure you place this way, and then you're going to measure. You're going to measure the 2.5 to make sure that it gives you exact of the value which you have, right? So from the center edge, from the width point to the first threading you made must be 2.5. This line must be 2.5. Look at it, it must be 2.5 at that point, right? 2.5 at that point. Then you make sure you stitch at the up point this way. So stitch close very well and stitch all through to this very point. After you have done this now, you cut your threads, cut your threads. Now remember that the down part is still open here. So what you will do now is to make sure that you align the trouser edge to lap with the pocketing direction. Don't allow this to go in or to come out this way. So it must align with this. This is a perfect connection, and don't allow any rumple or whatsoever to be on this point. This area must be smooth, right? So place it this way and make sure that there's no rumple or whatsoever. Look at it. This is how it should be. And after which, you now make a half-inch stitch here, half-inch stitch in here, just to here half an inch. Now, this sewing you are doing is to help you hold the trouser body with the pocketing and the lining together, right? After which, raise the main trouser up. Raise the main trouser up this way. Now, you're going to measure half-inch down and half-inch in. You put your notch here. This notching you are making here is to enable you create a space or a room when you are closing the side of the trouser. So you will not stitch down the pocketing alongside the sidelines of your trouser seam. So you are meant to shift this pocketing inwards by half an inch or 3/4 of an inch. So the simplest way to do that, measure from the trouser edge, half an inch down, and then half an inch in or 3/4 inch in. Then put a notch at that point, just like this. It's ideal. You see, right? It must be in this form. Then after you have done that, put your hand inside the trouser and bring out the pocketing in this form. After which, then start from that notching point you made. Start from the notching for you to be able to achieve a perfect sewing. If you start from here, there's a bit tendency that this notching will shift or tilt and you will not get a perfect finish in here. So start from that notching. which is from this notching point this way, and then stitch it all through down. So make sure you hold the notch points together this way, and then you hold it all through this way. So stitch all through, then make sure after which you cut your threads in this form. So take your time, please don't be in a haste to do otherwise. Take your time and go through this whole detail. So you stitch all the way in a curvy form, curve it all through to this very point. So once you are curving it, you can try to make it to be square or block, but I prefer this curvy part because the curvy part helps to smoothen whatever sharp edge that will give the trouser a shiny effect at the body. So I prefer this curvy edge so you can still maintain curvy edge. I only do square if I'm doing Ankara or maybe chinos or jean. But for plain trousers, I prefer the edges to be curvy. Then after you have done that, then you trim this edge. While trimming, give like 1/4 inch off so that you don't cut the line you have sewn. So here, you trim from here, you trim from here, gently trim all through this way, trim all through this way, trim, and then once you have gotten to this point, look at what you have. So after you have done that, remove all the threadings, any leftover threads you have, and then push this pocketing inside the trouser, push it in this way, and bring out the edges to come out nicely. Bring the edges to come out nicely. Make sure that this notch point, the both panels must still come back this way. And then after you have brought out the edges properly, and then you make sure that you start from here, start from the base, the curvy part, the tip here, and then use a machine footer, give it a final closure stitch. So this stitching you are making now is helping to reinforce the pocket to be stronger in case the owner has maybe puts in key or any sharp a bit strong object in the pocketing, so it doesn't tear off easily. So it's kind of a reinforcement to the pocket. So you gently go all the way this way, go all the way this way. Take your time, please. Don't be in a haste. Take your time, curve it. Then, once you get to that notch point, which we have already seen, this notch point, then part it a bit, and then pin in your needle, come up this way, and then give it a final closure. So this closure is also very important that you must go in an L-shaped form at that very point or direction. Then cut off your threads, and then this is what we have for our front panel pocket. Now this is the right. So you see how relaxed it is. Make sure there's no rumples or squeeze or foldings at this stage, because if you want to achieve a perfect finishing, you must start from the foundation in your sewing stages to achieve the final product. There's no magic that you do that will make you start roughly and finish nicely. You must start nicely so I can aim at finishing nicely as well. So we have done the first pocket. So the next you will do now is to do the same process which I have done here on the second panel of the trouser. I will do that. I will come back and show you how to fix the lining as well. So here now we have finished fixing our right and left front pocketing, our pockets on our trouser. See how smooth and how neat they are. So the next you will do now is to go and weave. Now, before you weave, you might fix your lining first, then weave. The lining fixing, still I've already shown us how to cut this lining in my cutting tutorial. So do well to go and check it out so that I don't repeat lectures. So now here you get your lining. I believe if you have watched the video on how to cut it, you understand it better now. So place your lining this way because it's better off to weave it together so that you use one weaving to achieve the finishing than weaving lining and weaving the trouser individually will give you a bulky edge at your weave points. So here you stitch at the tip. Please make sure you stitch at the tip, very close to the edge of the fabric. There should be no space from the sewn line. You should go as deep as possible so that when you weave, your weaving will cover the threading. The reason for the tip sewing is to enable your um, measurements to enter properly without altering or the threading you have sewn now showing when you lock your lap or start sewing doing the normal sewing. This is just like a temporary stitch that you are doing now in order to hold the lining together with the trouser panel. So make sure everything is lapped. Then the pleating, should come backwards this way. Make sure it's lapped this way, and then you stitch all the way down. Stitch all the way down. Stitch all the way down, and then you sew here as well. You sew here as well. You sew here as well. So once you have sewn to this very point, so this is what it looks like, right? So you cut your thread. So this is the lining fixing. You see how the lining is fixed. Now the essence of this pleat or this folding is essential because it helps the trouser to relax without contracting or compressing the main trouser bodies or panel. So after that, you cut a thread. So this is what we have, right? This is what we have. Then the next we are going to do now is to do the same lining fixing on the other part as well. So now we want to learn or see how to fix or do our single welt pocket, our single mouth welt pocket. Now, the only thing I will tell you here is that welt pocket is simple, it's also difficult, but then if you pay attention to details, you get it first. All right. So here you must make sure identify the front and back fabric which are marked chalk already on the body. So at the end of the day, you get your fabric this way. Here is my back panel, and here is my back as well. The two fronts are facing each other. So I open it up this way. Now, please watch closely. Now, if you observe, this trouser has a straight part and also has a curve, the one that has the crotch region, right? So the crotch region is not where you take measurement from. You take a value from the straight parts, the sides of the trouser. So what do you need to measure? You are going to measure your dart point. It's called darting point, right? So that dart point for regular trousers is 5 inches width. For bigger people, 5.5, right? So I will pick 5 inches here, 5 inches this point. Now that 5 inches, that point, just note the 5 inches. Then you can decide to, fold it from that 5 inches mark, just like that. And then the next thing you're going to do is to make sure that you measure 3.5 inches. You measure 3.5 inches deep this way. 3.5, that's the dart depth. Then the dart width, the dart leg is half an inch. Half an inch here. Half an inch here. Right? So make sure it's on the 5 inches point. And then you start from that half an inch, or most at times I reduce with my machine footer, but still remeasure 5 inches, which is very important, 5 inches exact. And then I use a machine footer, just place it a V shape this way, and then I stitch and go all the way to that 3.5 inch mark. Make sure you don't pass that 3.5. So invariably, I mostly don't get up to that 1/2 inch. I just do maybe 1/4, so that it doesn't shorten the waist circumference or waist measurement. So this is how your dart should look like. So after you have done this darting this way, do the same darting on the other side as well. I will do that. I'll come back to show the results. So after you have done the two darts, the next you will do now is to use gum stir and gum like measurement of, let's say, 2.5 inches or 3 inches width by the length of 7 or 7.5. Now the sense of the gumming is to enable or help this pocket creation you are going to do to come out nicely without any rumples or whatsoever. So you must make sure you have that mindset of neat finishing and apply every protocols or processes that will enable you achieve the neat finishing. So I will go and gum this at the wrong side, please, at the back or not in front. Use gum stay or even hair stay. Gum here, I will show you the measurement. The width is like 2.5 for 3, then the length here is 7 inches or 7.5. You after gumming it, I'll come back to show you how to deepen or start creating the welt pocket. All right, so we have gummed the back part and the dart area. Please observe that before you gum this gum stay here, you must make sure you iron out the darted area so that it will relax very well. Then you gum. So look at the gum measurements I used so that in case you want to do yours, I used 3 inches width by, width length of 3 inches by a width of 7.5. It's ideal, right? 3 inches this way by 7.5. Make sure that the gum is at the center of the dart. Both halves must be equal. You gum very well. Please, when you're gumming, iron from the back. Please don't iron from the front so that you don't shine the material. Because another thing that gives you a neat finishing is how you place your steam iron or your dry iron in ironing. Don't iron on the right part of the fabric. I gum from the back as well so that any shining will be on the wrong side. So after you have done this, now the next now is to create the welt pocket opening, right? Now, I believe by now most of us are after or eager to see how this is being done. So the standard measurement for wet pocket is 5 inches. If you meet bigger people, 5.5, right? So 5 inches is simply 2.5 inch apart from the center of the dart. The pocket must be at the center of this dart. The dart will divide the pocket into 2 equal halves. So here, simply you mark 2.5 inches this way, 2.5, and here you also mark 2.5 inches as well, right? And make sure that you maintain the same 3.5 inch dart which you have already programmed, right? So this is the point of your darting, and then bring your ruler and make a placement of a ruler that will give you a straight line. Please, very important. It must give you a straight line in this form. And after that, you also bring down the sidelines this way. Bring it down as well from here. You bring down the line this way as well. After you have done that, look, this is what it looks like. So it's advisable that you bring the corresponding component this way, merge it together, merge the two fronts together, making sure that you hold the crotch points perfectly well, holding the sides, holding the length this way, holding every corner equally, right? And then after you have held equally, then you tap your hand at the back in order to replicate the pocket marking here. So it becomes exact of this. Because if you want to mark it individually, you might make a mistake and the placements will not be the same. And the pocket will tilt wrongly how it should not have tilted. So after you have, replicated that point, you can now, make it to be bolder or more visible by remarking it this way. It's just like a guide on what you are doing. So after you have done that, then you also mark your choking all through this way. Mark your choking this way. And after which, this is what it looks like as well. So you will now proceed in your pocket dipping. Now, the next you do is to bring your pocketing for the back pocket as well. Bear in mind that the pocketing measurement is 8 inches by 20, right? Don't forget the measurements I gave us. Then you are going to hold this pocketing to be the pocketing facing will face the main trouser so that by the time you fling this one up, this area will be showing. If you place it this way, you are wrong. This one is not meant to be showing. So the front will face the lining and it must be placed 1 inch below the trouser length and then at the center of these darts. This pocketing we must fold together just like this and get the notch point this way and place it at that point, right? That data point, 1 inch below. Then you bring your office pin. Remember that as a tailor, you must make use of your sewing tools, and with the pin is one of it. This is the pin I use. Then bring your office pin and pin the lining at the up part so that it can retain or be at a stationary position. So you get it properly done that way, and then you arrange it and make sure the pocketing is now underneath the lining So make sure it's being held together, please. Very important, very important. It must hold together this way. And then after which you get the placket, the one you have gummed and weaved already, fold into two equal parts this way, and then you notch just like this. You notch just like this, and then the next you will do is to place the notching at the center of that darting, the darts you have already made. Now, conventionally, you can use your pen and mark 1/4 here and draw a line with your bead or pen, right, to guide you to get a perfect pocket tip size. But invariably, if you don't have it, you can still go ahead and use your chalk, extend the line on this trouser to the main placket body. Extend this one as well this way. This shows that the lining you're sewing will not exceed that very point, both front and back as well. So carefully lap your machine footer on the weave point, on the weaving, and stitch the beginning properly so that it doesn't pull off later on. And then carefully you pedal the machine down, and your hands must be as straight as possible. Then stitch the ending as well. It comes all through to this point. So this is the first sewing you will do. Cut your threads, cut your threads very well. So after you have done the cutting of your threads, you also bring the second placket, still fold together this way, and then notch the up point. After which you place it in this form. The two notches must face each other, and then you also replicate the same stitching you made at the up part. Before then, extend the choking as well at this point, extend as well at this point, and after which you stitch in this form. Please make sure that when you're stitching this, the both finishings must be half an inch. From the first threading to the second threading must be 0.5, half an inch. So this must be half an inch, right? Must be half an inch. So you carefully stitch from there, don't exceed the line, and then sew in a very straight line and end